The star system was a system set in place in Hollywood from the 1920s to the 1960s. It was a way for production companies and agents to keep their stars in check or aligned with their public image. This would lead to abuse of many stars, a lot of neglect, and a lot of stars would eventually come out and explain that they did not align with their image whatsoever and felt like they were being forced into being a completely different person. Today, we'll be exploring how the star system affected Clara Bow. From Clara Bow's early life, she had a rough go of it. Her family was incredibly poor. They were living in Brooklyn, New York. She got bullied as a child for having a stammer, but ever since birth, she was essentially just a caregiver for her mother. Her mother had two um, infant deaths prior to having Clara and Clara surviving, despite many doctors saying that Clara likely wouldn't. Whenever she was young, Clara's mother ended up falling from a second-story window, which led to her having seizures, which induced psychosis. It was later discovered that this was, in fact, a symptom of schizophrenia. When Clara started finding a little bit of success and she started getting interested in the Hollywood life, Clara's mother threatened Clara with a kitchen knife, and that ended with Clara's mother being locked into a mental hospital, and she would die shortly thereafter. Also in Clara Bow's early life, her childhood friend, who shared a same apartment building as Clara, died in her arms after she had found him on fire. She had heard him calling for her for help, but there was nothing that she could do. The beginning of Clara's career is due to primarily a beauty contest that was hosted by Motion Picture. She could not afford many of the things. She couldn't afford the fancy dresses, the hair, the makeup, and her father donated her that money to be able to submit her photos into this contest. Nobody thought that she would make it far, but she ended up winning that contest. As her prize, she was offered a small part in a locally filmed movie. But whenever she invited family and friends to attend the showing for this movie, they found that all of her parts had been cut. And apparently, those people that she had invited kind of turned on her and mocked her for this. She got a part in her second film, Down to Sea in Ships, and began receiving positive attention, getting positive reviews from critics, and shortly thereafter, she would move to Hollywood. She became a star relatively quickly, and studios would begin releasing several movies a year, all starring Clara. So she was very, very busy from the beginning of her movie career. She ended up signing with an agent, BP Schulberg, and she signed with Preferred Pictures in the beginning. Some of her notable films include It, Wings, Call Her Savage, The Wild Party, and Man Trap, while some not so notable ones would include Paramount on Parade, The Plastic Age, the pre-mentioned Down to Sea in Ships, Dancing Mothers, and Hoopla. Claire's career, she would often be outspoken about how she was rejected very early on, for constantly being ridiculed for being too young, too little, or too fat. She even says in an interview, it was often the latter that was told to her. Preferred Pictures ends up filing for bankruptcy in 1925 and closing down, so she and her agent went to Paramount Pictures. She was able to convey the true 1920s jazz flapper girl image that everybody had been witnessing kind of come out of, this time of repression and women being so unsexual and unconfident. She was pretty open about how this image of her did kind of concern her because it would affect how others perceive her and even how she would perceive herself. Her most notable film, It, stars Clara as a modern, independent, and promiscuous woman who shares the rags to riches story, very similar to Clara. This film would coin the term It Girl, and that's how the world will refer to Clara from there on out. Claire's agent, BP Schulberg, put her to work from the get-go very, very intensely, and he only was paying her about $200 a week. And she would be working on many of these films at the same time. After she was signed to Paramount, Clara starred in several movies that would later be deemed silent classics. Many of these films, however, have been lost due to neglect. But despite her status and substantial financial success for these studios, so many big names in Hollywood would continue to criticize, manipulate, and demean her. It was pretty well known that the women of Hollywood were not fans of Clara, and she was often uninvited from the big name parties, and she would just throw her own. The It Girl's promiscuous public image. There was lots of scandal that surrounded Clara throughout her entire career. Part of this is probably due to the fact that she managed to negotiate out of a morals clause in her contracts, which morals clauses were often forced into every contract during the star system age. This would basically deem anything that the star would do that would tarnish the image of the production companies was unacceptable, and they would be punished, they would be fired, they could even be blacklisted. So because she was so rare and having no morals clause, she was able to do anything she wanted without fear of the consequences directly of being fired for that. So because she had the image of the jazz baby flapper girl, she was able to openly be that to the full extent. So she would often be going out with men because she was unmarried at the time and in her 20s. But this led to her often being the subject of gossiping media. One rumor would twist her friendships and occasional dates with players on the USC football team into her having slept with the whole team because she would often hang out with them, throw parties and invite the team, and she would go on a date with a couple of them. Articles even began writing that she drank like a fish, took drugs, spent money, slept with men and women, and when those were unavailable, dogs, and that she frequently participated in threesomes and public sex. These rumors around Clara were intense. The beginning of the end. So, although she was able to escape a morals clause, which could be considered a win at the time, she was not exempt from mistreatment from those who were meant to be on her side fighting with her. Her father would work on her sets, but he was often drunk and he was described as being incredibly creepy, trying to pick up the actresses that were there working by using his status as Clara's father. He would badger Clara throughout her career to continue fighting for these prominent roles just so he could live off of her earnings. Keep in mind, they came from a very impoverished background where he was unable to keep jobs ever. Her mother struggled with mental health. So now he was just using Clara's success to just ride his life out while she's doing all of the work and he's just there enjoying it all. It came out much later that he had even sexually assaulted Clara in her teenage years. Her ex-hairstylist and her trusted secretary, Daisy DeVoe, tried to blackmail Clara after they had an argument. And Clara took DeVoe to court, and DeVoe was found guilty and was sent to jail. But taking her to court might have done more harm than it did good. She did get justice, but everything that DeVoe was trying to blackmail Clara for ended up being made public. These documents and DeVoe's witness testament trial would all become accessible to everybody. And these would include very, very private details of Clara's escapades. At this point, during the trial, Clara's career had already kind of taken a hit. Things had slowed down a little bit, and she was rare enough to be able to handle that transition from silent films to what they referred to as talkies, where there was synchronized sound with the film of the characters actually speaking, and you could hear the dialogue. Her popularity amongst the public really flourished during that time, but it was starting to kind of fade out just a little bit. After the blackmailing trials, she had a couple of movies like Kick In and No Limit, but they did not do as well as her previous films had. And this was the final straw for Paramount, so they decided to kind of just dump her officially. They didn't renew her contract, they were not interested in working with her anymore. Plus, with all of her scandals and that recent court case, they were over it. They were over her. Because of all of the drama that surrounded her, people, including her own agent, would call her Crisis a Day Clara. Fox would pick her up for a few more movies after Paramount had dumped her, and one was even kind of tagging some fun at the nasty rumors that were constantly being spoken about her. But even though this silly kind of take on the gossip was iconic, it wasn't enough to resurrect her stardom. After Hollywood, for Clara, the Great Depression kind of marks that end stretch of her career. This image that she had portrayed was extravagant, independent. She was out partying, she was out with guys, she was the promiscuous, take no crap kind of girl of Hollywood. And during the Great Depression, where, people don't have the time, energy, or finances to be that way, kind of watching her portray that image was just inappropriate for the time. After her Hollywood career had officially ended, she married a nice man, had a couple of children, but eventually she would share a similar fate to her mother. She was rumored to suffer from depression, and it was rumored that she had schizophrenic episodes herself. She passed away in 1965, but after her passing, in that same year, another film was released which continued to criticize her and her sexuality and would continue to exaggerate the rumor of her relationship with that USC football team. Clara would never find rest from the painful rumors and judgment that she faced despite her long-ended career and passing. Clara's impact. Besides becoming the original It Girl and holding responsibility for the term itself, the general public loved Clara, and she impacted the moviegoers in several ways. Because of her rags to riches stories, so many people found a bit of themselves in her. She wasn't the posh, moral, perfect, curated star that they so often saw. She was dirty, she was fun, she was silly, she was just living her life, and normal people saw themselves within that. Clara was a natural redhead, which she was bullied for as a kid, but she would enhance the redness as a star by dyeing her hair with henna. When this information came out, henna sales across the nation skyrocketed, and so many places that would sell henna sold out so quickly. She would pave the way for the modern sex symbol woman in Hollywood and film, and many still comment on her impressively modern look compared to other 20s stars who just look vintage. Many would say that looking at a picture of her, it looks like she's been styled to look like a 1920s star, but she looks like somebody who we would see walking around today. The world's view on Clara. These were some quotes from notable people that kind of encapsulate who she was. A Paramount boss, Adolf Zucker, says she danced even when her feet were not moving. F. Scott Fitzgerald says, the real thing, someone to stir every pulse in the nation. Author Judith Mackerel says, I hate to use the word iconic, but in terms of exemplifying the image of the 1920s woman, she was the key. She embodied the flapper girl. And Elaine Shepard says, there's a very contemporary feel to her. And some quotes from Clara herself. I'm a curiosity in Hollywood. I'm a big freak because I'm myself. All the time the flapper is laughing and dancing, there's a feeling of tragedy underneath. She's unhappy and disillusioned, and that's what people sense. They yell at me to be dignified, but what are dignified people like? The people who are held up as examples to me? They are snobs, frightful snobs. And here are the sources I use for the exploration of Clara Bow and how the star system affected her and her career.